Chapter 23. The Route.
20th hour, 7th day, 5th month, 807 post-Heavenfall.
On the route to the Cadian District Watchhouse, Ariya, Kellen and Zarin deliberated on how to best gather the information they needed to identify the dream hag. At first, they considered being coy with their approach, and perhaps using Ariya's employment at the runesmiths as a cover. In the end, they decided to gamble on candor and produce Valeria's writ. Discretion was still paramount, as they did not know which face the dream hag wore, and hoped the first individual they requested help from was not her. Upon entering the Cadian Watchhouse for the third time this year, Ariya felt its interior was becoming far too familiar for her own comfort. Knowing the source of the city's misfortune was somewhere within these very walls only sent another spike of dread through her. She pressed on regardless, starting by interacting with the clerk to let them know they needed to speak with the watch commander. Once the writ was acknowledged, the three of them were brought to an office where they met a human warden who was large in stature, balding, and had a naturally frowning face.
"What seems to be the issue?" Lieutenant Peril asked after they introduced each other.
"We believe there is a link between the recent wave of sudden deaths and a history of incarceration at this specific watchhouse," Ariya began. "We need to see the records of who was on duty at the time of their custody."
Peril looked around the room as if visualizing her words hanging in the air.
"Acting on behalf of your organisation or not, I don't feel particularly comfortable handing out such detailed logs," he refused with a scowl. "And if I'm correct, it sounds like you're accusing this station of having something to do with the recent fatalities."
We're not accusing the station, sir. We're trying to understand patterns to keep people safe. Both our organisations are after the same goal, and we're more than willing to share anything we discover with you.
The sergeant shook his head. "If you were a fully fledged Sentinel, I would consider it. However, you all are still only candidates, so that writ you showed isn't going to cut it for this level of access. Come back with a ranking Sentinel, and then we can maybe discuss it further."
"Do you even fucking care?" Zarin snapped.
The sergeant glared with malice.
"What?"
Even Ariya was startled at the outburst. "We're offering assistance because we know exactly what we're dealing with. This is a golden opportunity handed to you on a silver platter, and you're too much of a coward to follow through. We've assisted Magistrate Donabar, and we know plenty of Sentinels up to the second class who are in charge of the case. I can't imagine any of them would be happy to know you could have prevented further deaths by stonewalling this investigation."
"Listen here, you disrespectful shit,"
Peril snarled, leaning over his desk. "I'm following guidelines. I don't hand out sensitive logs to anyone, writ or no writ. Watch your tone, or I'll throw you out myself or haul you all to the dungeons."
"But we're not just anyone.
We have an official writ from a Sentinel with a signature and stamp. If they had the availability to come here, they would have done so already. Every second you waste is more time for victims to suffer in agony before there's another report about the next batch of deaths." "Do you even have proof the deaths are linked?" The warden spoke through gritted teeth.
"Yes, actually," Kellen cut in.
She retrieved her wand and projected a floating table of records containing a list of the recent victims, their incarceration date, the crime they were charged with, and the penalty fine. "We found these in the Athenaeum archives." Peril stood up and squinted at the glowing letters. "I remember most of these," he mumbled. "You truly know Magistrate Donabar?"
"Yes, sir,"
Ariya affirmed. The lieutenant sat back down, but continued to gaze at the floating list. After a long minute of organising his thoughts, he finally broke the heavy silence. "Here's what's going to happen. I'll be informing Magistrate Donabar you came and visited under the authority of the Sentinels. In the meantime, you'll be allowed 15 minutes with the records log, no more. I'll be keeping my eye keenly on you, so don't think about removing anything or making any copies. You best not be bluffing about Donabar, or I can't imagine she or the Sentinels would be happy about that." He eyed Zarin venomously, repeating back the last line.
That should be enough time, Kellen estimated.
I'll get the time shift logs, the sergeant grumbled before exiting the office, leaving the door wide open.
Ariya gave a quick glance of concern at Zarin. His face had returned to his more stoic form, but she could tell his sudden eruption came from mental scars of the curse. Turning away towards Kellen, she asked, "Will 15 minutes be enough time for you?"
Kellen gave an honest shrug. I don't know, but I didn't want to push the lieutenant any further. I'll work as fast as I can. The warden returned and dropped a massive ledger on the table with a thud that echoed across the tense silence. Have at it, he growled impatiently. The shade elf approached the tome and flipped through a few of the pages. 2 to 3 months ago should suffice, she whispered, running her fingertip across the header of dates. Kellen pointed her wand at the book's gutter and slowly traced down its crease, chanting in Draconic as she did. She repeated the actions for over a dozen pages before stepping back and pointing the wand upwards. Phantom copies of the records appeared in the air and stitched together to form one wide canvas. The list of victims also manifested to merge their incarceration date with the timesheets, but began to flash red at the attempt. Your record keeper has awful handwriting. I'm going to need some time to clean this up. Kellen materialized an illusionary records table and psychically copied the entries with illegible handwriting, one at a time. Once she transcribed them to a cleaner format and had the original characters be replaced, the ledgers locked into place and the list of victims successfully merged with the duty rosters. 12 names glowed brighter than the rest. Forrest Symphony, Turelius Makar, Neb Lee. Kellen read aloud the results before turning to the sergeant. Solomon Peril. Hellfires of Tartarus, that's ridiculous. Of course I'd be on the list. I've been the commanding authority for the night shift for over a year now. You better not be accusing me of being responsible. We're not, Lieutenant, Ariya assuaged. There's still a lot of names to look into, Zarin commented. How can we observe all these individuals? Perhaps there's another factor we can narrow it down by, Kellen suggested. Ariya pondered the possibilities as her gaze drifted from the floating list to the scowling warden, whose jaw was still tight with residual ire. 12 names was an impossible number to investigate discreetly, especially among just the 3 of them. They either needed more help or another filter to serve as a piece of the puzzle that was uniquely solid. Her mind raced back through the events of the past few months, searching for another constant. Eventually, she came up with 2. Try adding another victim, Coley Megna, Ariya proposed. Helen's eyelids fluttered as she commanded her spell. With the new entry, the field narrowed down to 8 names. Which of them are women? Women? Why women? Zarin wondered. It's an inkling, Ariya replied. The first dream hag was Erin Shearer, and the second was Yeely Elston. Both of them were female. I would believe the dream hags had a preference of disguising themselves as women, since it would be easier to imitate. Kellen complied with the request, and the room went silent at the final revelations. Alfina Turner, J.C. Ducal, Zarafi Croft. Alfina and J.C. were the 2 jailers present the same night of Coley's death, Ariya exclaimed. Sergeant Peril, are they here? Peril was hesitant to cooperate, but admitted the logic was sound. Warden Croft is present in the watchhouse, as she is our resident arcanist. The other 2 were assigned patrol shifts tonight. Do you have their routes? Yes, he answered flatly. May we see them? Peril, and let out an exasperated sigh before stepping out of the office and returning with a map of the district and another book. This here is the master beat book of the patrol routes. Warden Turner is usually assigned to Route 8, and Ducal is number 14. He pointed to the coloured lines on the diagram. Are you thinking about following where they're keeping watch? Kellen asked. Ariya shook her head. That might take too long. Did you pull the home addresses of people recently incarcerated while under the watch of the 3 wardens, the ones still alive?
Kellen flourished her wand and generated another ethereal list. Seconds later, faint and shimmering lines of violet arcana stretched from each entry towards different points on the map.
You're a genius, Ariya, Zarin complimented. It looks like there's 5 residents along Turner's path, and 3 on Ducal's. There's a couple on Turner's that seem tighter together as part of a housing community, while Ducal's seem more spaced out, except for 2 of them who reside in the same location.
They're unfortunately on opposite sides of town too, Ariya observed.
It's against everything the Sentinel instructors taught us, but we'll have to split up and check them. Check them ourselves? Can't the city wardens help somehow? Zarin thought out loud as he shot a withering look at the desk sergeant. Peril shrugged. Everyone is out on patrol. I'm hesitant to commit bookkeepers and our only spellcaster to your hunt. When patrolmen do require reinforcements, we use these. He pulled back a drawer and set a couple of red tubes on the table. Ariya recognized them as alarm flares that not only produced a bright signal in the sky, but also let out an illusory ringing bell sound. By offering the items, she could tell he was silently committing his wardens to support. We'll strictly scout and observe from a safe distance, she declared. If one of them is a dream hag, we'll fire them off and let the authorities know. Should I inform the Sentinels about the plan? Kellen asked. I can send out a letter through an arcane mailbox.
Maybe send one to Sentinel Valeria to start, Zarin proposed.
She's probably gone home for the night, though. Ariya weighed the involvement of the wider organisation, knowing they could handle the dream hag. However, alerting them would likely lead to retribution against her own team, and possibly censure or expulsion. Regardless of the consequences, the threat of the creature was far too great to not consider calling them for assistance. She considered another option, which was a compromise between protocol and necessity. Contact our peers and have them stand by at the watch house. Tell them, if they see a flare, to send another letter to the Cadian Temple of Mending, as well as a runner to let them know we found the dream hag. The rest of them can come to our aid. So how do you want to divide the team? Zarin inquired. Ariya stared at the map and considered the options. There were more locations to check on Turner's route, but they were closer to the watch house, while Ducal's was the inverse. I can take this route while you and Kellen can take the other, she suggested. What about Warden Croft? Zarin asked. You don't want one of us to keep an eye on her here? I'll do it, Peril finally volunteered. I'll put a suppression collar on her and move them to a holding cell. That settles it then, affirmed the plan with a nod. Part of me hopes we don't encounter the Night Mother, but be very careful if you do. Hold on, Ariya. Aren't you dressed a little too flashy for reconnaissance? Zarin pointed to her Edenvalian attire. Maybe the wardens have a uniform they could spare. No need. Her lips curled to a clever smile as she rotated the discretion ring on her hand. The illusion of her outfit vanished into the jewel, and she now stood in the dark blues and black of her battle garb. Now I'm ready. The evening hum of street activity had softened under the night sky, with the exception of a few pedestrians and the sound of reverie from a distant establishment. The moon cast sharp and deep shadows between the buildings, creating a piano keys-like environment of silver light and bottomless black. As more of the Ovyliax's inhabitants settled down into the rhythm of leisure, Ariya prowled the quiet streets with her eyes hunting for any trace of her target. She stuck to the ground and walked casually, as opposed to darting in and out of shadows or scaling the rooftops. Avoiding notice and blending in unremarkably was the preferable, at least while she was still searching for the dream hag. When Ariya did catch the hint of attention from a passerby, their reactions ranged from quick glances to assuming she was another pedestrian. Over 45 minutes had passed and she had not found her quarry. However, Ariya did arrive at the address of the first house of interest along the patrol path. It was a small 2-story building of dishwater grey plaster, faded timber, and a stout oak door.
No yard was present due to its close proximity to the street itself, but the front was lined with potted plants that gave a pop of natural life. No light emanated from any of the windows, and the chimney above showed no indication of being in use. What gave Ariya pause, however, was the faint yapping of a dog from the second floor. Its presence presented a complication for trespassing, and she slunk away into the shadows of a nearby alley to wait and hear if the dog's barking would cease. If it did, the owner was likely home and had quieted it. Yet after long moments of listening to the dog's continuous noise, Ariya guessed the house was either unoccupied or there was an intruder. The elf sensed the street had been deathly vacant and devoid of anyone travelling through to have startled the pet from the outside. If there was a reason the dog was still on alert, it was because something was wrong inside. Her elven eyes gazed at both ends of the streets for witnesses before hurrying to the door with her hand on her lock-picking pouch. When she reached the handle, she was thankful to find it unlocked. Nevertheless, that gratefulness immediately turned to dread as she realised there was a chance someone may have broken in before her. As the candidate gingerly pushed the door open, her nose was slammed by the unexpected stench of urine and excrement. Ariya quietly gagged, watering eyes looking into an open floor space that combined the kitchen and living room together. The home would have looked tidy and inviting, if not for the puddles of piss and dried stools scattered throughout the floor. Dishes had also been left abandoned in the sink and neglected to the point that a swarm of flies had sired maggots onto the refuse. On the far side of the living room was a narrow staircase where the dog's barking echoed above. Ariya silently entered, limiting her breathing while trying to avoid stepping on bodily fluids or droppings. Her heart pounded with nerve-wracking anticipation as she crept towards the stairs, which felt much further away than they appeared. She wished her comrades were here, but reassured herself through the reminder that she only needed to visually confirm the dream hag. As Ariya made it to the first step, the dog remained oblivious to her presence. The elf used its cries to mask her climb, delicately placing her feet down on the sides and testing each plank to avoid creaks. When she ascended high enough to peek past a wooden railing, Ariya could see another relatively open floor plan, furnished to be both a private painting studio and a bedroom. Brushes were placed to dry on a nearby desk, with an incomplete portrait set on an easel. The dog, a small breed of shaggy grey and white fur, was still barking at the foot of a bed where an individual was lying unsettling still. Like downstairs, the space would have appeared organised if not for the pet using the interior as its personal latrine. She scanned the room's blind spots, eyes darting between the side of a large wardrobe and an open door to the bathroom. Ariya remained motionless as she waited for any indication of another intruder while considering the next course of action. She wanted to inspect further, but knew the dog would be alerted the moment she approached. The candidate watched the bathroom door for another long minute before steeling herself and choosing to reveal her presence. As soon as Ariya added a couple of steps to the climb, the small canine scampered to face the new intruder, before giving her a torrent of barks. She momentarily ignored it, quickly rushing in to check the blind spots, and was relieved to find the rest of the house safely empty. Ariya then returned her attention to the dog and crouched low to make herself appear less of a threat. "Shh, shh, it's all right," she whispered, while pulling off one of her gloves and gently reaching out with her bare hand. The pet paused its alarm cries to cautiously scuttle towards and sniff her scent. As she felt the tap of its wet nose on her skin, Ariya used the opportunity to read the name on the collar. Daisy. "You poor thing," she said, heart melting as she saw the dishevelled state of Daisy's matted fur. Ariya attempted to pet the top of her head, but it recoiled back and returned to incessantly yapping and growling. Failing to earn its trust, she sighed and shifted her focus towards the bed.
Lying upon their back, with arms and legs outstretched towards the four corners of the mattress, was a frail and emaciated human woman who would have appeared to be in her 50s if not for the gaunt appearance aging her decades more. Her eyes were closed, and her body was completely immobile, without even the subtle motions of life beneath the crumpled covers.
Ariya's breathing quickened with her heart rate, taking in the rank smell of the air which caustically mixed with the trepidation coursing throughout her chest. As much as she did not want it to be true, every fibre in her body instinctively knew what she saw in front of her was another face of death itself. Procedure, unfortunately, demanded she confirm by physical touch, which caused her hands to curl and tremble with apprehension. The idea felt violating, and she had the irrational vision that the woman might suddenly awaken and attack. The candidate pushed her fears down and imagined what Father Gama would do with his expertise. Ariya reached out with a naked hand towards the side of the woman's neck and was astonished to feel the flesh still warm under her touch. Nevertheless, no pulse could be found as Ariya pressed down at various areas of where it should be. The elf quickly pulled her hand back as her stomach strained to keep its contents down. Regardless of her visceral discomfort, she needed to be completely certain and pushed through the dread to check for a pulse at the wrist. Again, there was none, and she also noticed the joints in the woman's hand and arm were still pliable and limp, to suggest rigor mortis hadn't set in yet. Ariya quickly backed away, as she felt this was enough evidence to conclude the victim had died within a few hours. Finally at her limit, she ran downstairs, out the front door, and into the summer night where she took in gulpfuls of fresh air. Daisy had chased after her all the way down to the threshold, where she continued to unleash a barrage of barking. "I'm so sorry about your mother, Daisy," Ariya panted while trying to console the dog. Daisy understood none of it as the elf gently closed the door on her to muffle her yaps. Looking around the street to see if anyone was still awake, she found the nearest one just a few houses away across the street. "Hello! Help, please!" She banged on the door with lights on behind a window. Moments later, the entrance cracked open and a skinny man with spectacles and a deeply confused expression appeared. "Is something the matter?" he asked. "Yes, your neighbour in that home was found dead." Ariya pointed to the woman's building. "Miss Norris?" "I hadn't seen her in a while, but I thought she was out of town. I'll contact the watch house." The man went back inside, to which Ariya used the opportunity to slip away. Under normal circumstances, she would have stayed and shared details as a witness to the authorities. However, it was likely the dream hag was still in the streets and preparing to strike the next prey. Ariya threw caution to the wind and sprinted towards the next address, hoping to reach the location before the Night Mother. The journey took another 15 minutes, and she found herself standing at the perimeter of a moderately sized church. Although to simply call it a church would be misleading, as it was built more like a fortress than a place of worship. Its walls were of thick, dark stone from top to bottom, with narrow arrow slits instead of windows of stained glass. The surrounding courtyards were lined with statues of martial saints and doubled as training grounds, complete with sparring equipment and ranged targets. Most notable of all was the steeple, shaped to resemble a massive sword plunging into the ground, where the emblem depicting Turan's scales of justice and war were affixed upon the centre part of the crossguard. As Ariya watched the front from afar, she saw someone enter the church from the front door. There was no mistaking their identity based on Ariya's memory of the hair and warden's uniform from their interaction months ago. It was J.C. Ducal,